If your life were a Netflix series, what would it be called?
Inclusion is the key to innovation and growth.
Like तू अपने आप को सलमान खान समझता है?
I'm not an HR leader. I'm a business leader who happens to be wearing the hat of HR or people.
That irrespective of whether you do something right or wrong, you're going to be abused.
I lead my own life, and even if it be my own mistakes, at least they're my own.
I wanted to go back in time and talk to us about your journey.
The camera is always on, and you're always a star. Can you ride the wave, or are you going to get crushed by it?
Exactly.
Is the choice that all of us have.
They would not follow you for this just because you're the manager.
People figure out what works for them and they find it.
There's a lot of confusion out there in terms of how to build a meaningful career.
That's not easy.
Let them feel welcome. Let them feel included.
One of my favorite questions was, why have you joined here? But when it boils down to how do you act during tough times, that's when character really shows up.
You were talking about the growth of the organization at large. It is not just limited to talent alone.
Hire the best people. Make sure you give them loads and loads of context. Make sure that we have got people with the right sort of values, and then get out of the way.
You have always loved content. Is that the reason why you joined Netflix? The Hustle Group Company. Let me introduce you to the Hustle Group Company. It's a lifestyle brand that's redefining streetwear through the power of fashion, self-belief, and resilience. The second one being Discover Dollar, which is an AI-driven tech company that helps brands and retailers recover hidden dollars from overpayments and leakages. DocsNow's intelligent platform empowers businesses of all sizes to rapidly collect, manage, govern, and collaborate on the data front, transforming your documents and making sure there's an impact on the business bottom line, all in a secure and a single environment. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Innovators and Disruptors podcast. I'm your host Abhay Tandon, and today we have a very special guest, Sudeep Ralhan. The privilege of hosting Sudeep, who is a true trailblazer in the world of HR and organizational leadership, with over 20 years of experience spanning a lot of different industries like tech, FMCG, BPO, startups, and so on and so forth, media and entertainment as well now. Sudeep has been at the forefront of driving innovation, inclusion, and cultural transformation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. You're very, very kind. Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
Thank you so much. Sudeep, you have so much of experience, across different domains.
Yes, I am very old. That's true.
Sorry?
I am very old. That's true.
No, but there's a lot of amazing experience that you've got and across different industries. So let's first address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Is it okay to stare at your partner on a working day?
Maybe that's the reason I'm single. You never know. That could be the reason. But on a more serious note, I think everyone is getting too distracted by some of these statements. I feel we are actually at a fabulous time in our overall ecosystem where everyone can find what works for them. And the way we think about movies, that every movie finds its own audience.
Right.
Similarly, companies find their own talent pool and vice versa. So I think people figure out what works for them and they find it. So I don't think there's one right rule for everyone.
Okay.
And I haven't stared at my partner's face, so I'm guessing. Like I said, that's the reason I'm single. But yeah.
Okay. Fair. I think I recently had an episode where I was on a Sunday staring at my wife's face a lot more. And she did put up a story on Instagram to showcase to the world that he does that, right? So some brownie points to me. In all these years of experience in the HR domain, what in your growing up, I wanted to go back in time and talk to us about your journey as a kid while you're growing up and what eventually some of those pointers, some of those learnings that got you interested and intrigued about HR domain and choose this as a career choice.
Well, I think the choice of HR domain came much later, but you're absolutely right. The core sort of work ethic, principles, values get formed as you're growing up. I grew up in a family that was very different from the rest of the world around us. As you know, our family loved books, our family loved movies. Yep. We also had very strong women role models in our family. which shaped my worldview right from the very beginning. My childhood was also, we also went through a lot of turbulent times, right? Lots of ups and downs, lots of turbulent times, work-wise, financially. My father's health was not okay, and he passed away at a very early age. And therefore, life was really a roller coaster. But at the same time, there was a foundation of love and security and acceptance, which, like I said, shaped my worldview. So, we were brought up to read, we were brought up to inquire and have an independent point of view. And that's a core value for me. We were brought up to be respectful of everyone, irrespective of whatever identity they came from. And therefore, inclusion is a very strong part of my ecosystem, right? Agility, just out of the sheer roller coaster that you're on. So you learn to be resilient, you learn to be agile. So that's important. And you also realize that in order to genuinely stay humble and not get overwhelmed by too much stress in your life, you need to have a sense of humor. And I think that's helped me in good stead. So all of these values were critical. And then later on, when I was, doing my MBA and I was figuring out my specialization, I actually switched. So I was going to do marketing, and everyone was doing marketing, and everyone was chasing after the same jobs. And if there's something that I definitely never want to be is be like a sheep, right? Just following and giving into peer pressure. So I decided to take up HR because I felt that my love for people, psychology, dynamics, all of that comes into play. And honestly, HR at that time, this was 20 plus years ago, was just starting to emerge as a career option. And I felt I would rather be first and foremost there rather than follow what everyone else is doing. And starting from that point, Abhay, till date, most decisions that I've taken, academic as well as career decisions that I've taken, have been against the wishes of many people around me, except my family, who've always stood by me. But many of my, people who would mentor me or wish me well, starting from my professors at that time to, mentors and leaders now, have disagreed with me on my career choices. But, I use my own sort of algorithm in my own mind to figure out what's the right thing for me to do. And again, going back to the core point of having an independent point of view, having a sense of conviction, I go ahead and do it. And therefore, I always say, I lead my own life, and even if it be my own mistakes, at least they're my own, and I live and learn by them.
Yeah, it shouldn't hold regrets, and you think of it, a lot of people talk about it, but they're not necessarily following this, right? It's a profound statement in that sense of it. And to a lot of points that you made, it resonated because when I was growing up, my father also spoke very highly of you, saying that, just look at Sudeep as a role model, right? So I've been hearing that from a very young age, and I understand the journey that you've had, right? Understand in a sense that I know what you've been through, how you built your life around it, and that's fantastic, right? You've been inspiring us for a very long period of time. And I remember when I was 10 years of age, you handed me a lot of these books that were your books. And I was introduced for the first time to a lot of classics. I think the first one that I read was The Mutiny on Board HMS Bounty. And that created my love for books as well. So thank you so much. I did want to publicly acknowledge that as well.
Pay it forward. You have to create and instill that love for learning in books in other people. That's what people did with me. Coincidentally, today morning, I was looking at a video of one of my earliest English teachers who had a major impact on my life. She once embarrassed me in front of so many students by making me repeat a word in a particular tone as practice for a speech competition. And she made me repeat it in front of hundreds of students for like 30 or 40 times. And I was telling my nephew today that she's one of the people I respect so much because she instilled that love and she instilled that discipline in me. And she's now also an art critic. So she posts a lot of videos about her love for art and what she does. But I think there are just so many people, and when people talk about influences and so on, yes, there are lots of great people that we can think of, and statesmen and so on. But I honestly feel that it is people that we meet like this, and especially in my case, teachers, who I think have had a profound influence in my way of thinking and my work ethic and my discipline.
Amazing. That's so amazing. Uh, I I heard you say a very interesting statement that while you were pursuing your MBA, you said that you didn't want to choose marketing, but I also realized that you have stated this out that HR is a function of marketing.
HR is a marketing function.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So how I mean how did they finally converge?
No, because I genuinely am very passionate about marketing. That's why I was planning to specialize in marketing. And I'd actually started working in advertising and marketing even during my graduation. So while my graduation was going on. So that's the reason why initially I was thinking. And that passion for marketing has stayed till date. And I realized that some of the marketing principles, especially about putting the consumer at the heart of everything that you do, or putting the customer at the heart of everything that you do, can apply to all functions and especially HR. So that's where I always talk about that I'm not an HR leader, I'm a business leader who happens to be wearing the hat of HR or people.
Makes
And
sense.
second, the function that I lead is a marketing function, which means if you apply the core principles of putting people at the core of every decision, of thinking about how you are creating a product and a brand that sells itself rather than you trying to push it down, to people, and then follow through in terms of data-driven decisions, insights and research, using the right MVP model of kind of piloting and building on things. I think all of these principles work beautifully for HR. So that's become like sort of my mantra over a period of time,
Makes
where
sense.
I try and sort of reinforce these principles even in the HR functions.
No, it makes a lot of sense. At the end of the day, you're taking decisions. When I remember, you were leading the function at Walmart Tech India. There was there was a hyper growth phase of Walmart, and I remember that when we had those conversations as well, you were talking about the growth of the organization at large. It was not just limited to talent alone,
Yeah.
right? And keeping that in mind, there were different strategies that you had taken up of acquiring talent as well as part of how the talent will contribute to the overall growth of the organization in India, right? Or globally as well. So very fascinating. And in fact, it does make a lot of sense when you put it this way that you are a business leader who's wearing a HR hat, and more specifically, a lot of uh, the leadership perspectives that come in when it comes to data-driven decision making, or objectively looking at the overall impact at a global level, or at organizational level, then you have to look at it in singularity in that sense of it, and
Yeah.
then take the necessary decisions forward. Uh, but that also brings me to another question. You have worked across so many different companies, and they're all in different domains, if I can take the liberty of saying so. Accenture to GSK, and then Walmart,
Right.
Upstocks, and now Netflix, right? So very different. I'm sure that I've missed a few in between or earlier than that as well. So across these different industries, I'm sure there must be something which must be very different when it comes to the HR function,
Yeah.
and there must be some things which must be completely identical. Do you want to talk a little bit about how these all converge as
Yeah.
well as they all diverge at some places?
Yeah. So my love for sort of diversity comes in many forms, including in careers, right? Where I think I'm privileged enough to be in a function where one can sort of transcend boundaries and work across different industries. And I've really loved doing that. So obviously, the context changes every single time. When you're working and you're thinking about learning in an environment like an Accenture, where you're thinking about learning for, say, 150,000 people and engineers, and how do you upskill and build competency for that?
Right.
Versus you think about learning in, say, a GSK context, where you're talking about 400 salespeople who are driving $500 million worth of sales, and how do you build their capability? It's dramatically different, and that's where your own problem solving skills and your agility comes in. So I think all of these companies that I've worked with have obviously different levels of scale, complexity, pace, and so on. And that's what makes it exciting for me, that I'm able to apply sort of my mind to different problems at different levels. But I think over the time, I've also realized that there is more, to your question, more similarity than differences. Because I've also been privileged enough to work with great companies. And the one thing that all of these great companies have in common is the focus on people and
Makes no
talent,
sense, yeah.
right? Every single organization sort of recognizes that fundamentally their power, their superpower, or even the lack of it comes from how much of capability, performance, engagement their talent has. And
Makes no sense.
and that's been great. I mean, as an HR person, what more could you ask for? Because I know that HR people in many organizations have to fight for a seat at the table,
Right.
have to fight for having a share of voice in the room. Thankfully, I've never had to do that because you work with organizations that already recognize the importance of talent and culture. And then the route to get there is different, right?
Right.
The way a Walmart thinks about culture and people could be very different from the way a GSK thinks and very different from the way a Netflix thinks.
Right.
But the focus is absolutely the same. The route is a little different, which is what makes it exciting.
That's amazing. In fact, that brings my thought process, perspective to another place, which is cultural ethos.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of organizations, for example, when I started working in Accenture. And since you worked at Accenture, you could probably relate to this. But I've had my fair share of work experiences in various large organizations too. And I've seen that focus on people sometimes is a little superficial as it's supposed to be, right? And that's why you can see through the policies and understand what are the policies which are there for the sake of it and what are not, right? But the youngsters, the young folks who are joining these large organizations, they get impacted by it. Because some of these organizations, which are not very people friendly or where they do not have meaningful policies and which are being actually applied, then they are exposed to toxic work environments as well.
Yeah.
And that normalizes the whole toxic work culture for them, which means that, going forward, when they step out of their first large organization into other organizations, they bring the same toxic culture to all the other places, thinking it's a normalized way of leading life. As a HR function, and I'm sure, since you have been a champion of cultural ethos, of diversity, equity, and inclusion as well, how have you tackled some of these challenges? And, have there been some very interesting policies that, you've deployed?
Policies are just a sort of final representation, so to speak, right? And like you said, all good organizations will have policies, and they are, unless you are a really unique company like a Netflix, which has its own sort of cultural ethos, most policies end up looking like borderline copy paste of each other.
Right.
But where they really come alive or not is through daily role modeling and behavior. And I think that's what a lot of leaders and organizations sort of tend to miss. That culture is not about having a fancy set of values written on a wall or great policies on a portal. It's about day-to-day actions and behaviors.
Right.
And, one of my favorite sort of things that I say to leaders is the camera is always on and you're always a star. And it is surprising how many leaders forget that fact. Because what leaders are doing and saying on a day-to-day basis is getting sort of cascaded down.
Right.
And the same behavior is getting replicated and even amplified.
Makes sense.
Right. When I joined GSK and I would talk to sales executives and I would do these sales visits and consumer visits, which I loved. And I would talk to sales executives. And one of my favorite questions was, why have you joined here? And why are you here? And they would give me different reasons. They would talk about the brand and the culture and the company and career, etc. And something that not one, not two, but quite a few people said to me. And I'm going to speak in Hindi now, so I'm sorry for that because I can't replicate the tone in English. But what they would say is, sir, yahan na gali galauj nahi chalti. And it was something so basic to me because I was coming from Accenture where, there was no gali galauj at all. But I realized that they were coming from other companies, and they were good brands, by the way, which
Right.
they were coming from. And they were just used to a culture where it was okay for managers to shout at them,
Yeah.
where if the targets were not met in the evening, they would get like a really bad call from their leaders and their managers and get called out in meetings and borderline abused, right?
Right.
And they thought it was okay until they came to a company where it was not okay. And they said, oh my God, right? And they stayed
Yeah.
with us and they built their careers with us. And that to me is a powerful, it's a powerful memory for me because I hold on to that memory when I speak to, for example, startup founders sometimes. And everyone likes to talk about culture, right? Favorite topic of everyone. Everyone wants to talk about culture and say nice things.
Right.
But when it boils down to how do you act during tough times, that's when character really shows up.
True.
Right?
Very true.
What is the behavior that your people are observing? How are you conducting yourself? How are you showing up?
Right.
That's when the rubber hits the road and culture truly gets formed. So culture doesn't get formed by policies. It doesn't get formed by values. These are good baseline things to have, but culture is getting formed by day-to-day actions. And that I feel is something most people tend to miss. So I have taken it. See, I feel that my job as an HR person is obviously to run the people engine.
Right.
You have to hire, you have to, do performance management and learning and all of comp and all of that stuff. But you're also a custodian of culture.
Right.
And this moment that I just spoke about, the GSK moment, is one of many moments that stay with me because I have to keep reminding myself that culture is not strategy in a deck. Culture is about day-to-day behaviors. And that's what I try and sort of not only practice myself, obviously, but also when I'm coaching and partnering with my leaders, try and kind of building that point again and again and again. Honestly, that's how I view it.
Amazing. That's really amazing and brilliant points for a lot of leaders out there who are listening to you, specifically in both types of organizations, right? Be it startups or large enterprises, that it's their behavior that really molds the behavior of the youngsters who are looking up to them, right? And who are probably reporting into them. Gen Z today is very, very differently oriented. If I at least this is my thought process, that they're very differently oriented, and I think there has to be a more meaningful mechanism for them to go about learning things.
Yeah.
In terms of how we shape that, because they're the future leaders in the country, right? And
Yeah, I agree. No, I think to your point, I know there's a lot of debate and often controversial debate about Gen Zs versus millennials and stuff like that. And, I keep going back to that fact that if you think about yourself as a marketing function, then you can't blame the talent pool for example, interviewing with 6 companies at a time, holding 3 offers, and so on and so forth. I mean, one can debate the merits and demerits of doing that. But the point is, what that reflects is a deeper behavior or a mindset
Right.
that these people don't necessarily trust you and the companies anymore.
right,
And that is the trust that one needs to sort of rebuild at this point. Because the capacity, especially with the information explosion, with the fact that, everyone is exposed to practices across the world 100% of the time, you can't pull wool over people's eyes all the time. You can't BS your way out of difficult conversations, right? You have to be candid. You have to be courageous in the way you speak and approach this generation.
right.
And if you aren't, they'll see through it.
Yeah.
Right. And what you see is a backlash of that happening right now. So I completely agree. I think companies need to sort of tailor their communication, their style to a generation that I feel is obviously tremendous potential. And like you said, the leaders of tomorrow,
Right.
but also will not easily fall for regular corporate speak. Right. You have to be a little bit more transparent. You have to be more honest.
Right.
You have to be a lot more direct.
But so coming to Gen Zs and younger generation or the future leaders as well. So how would you? I mean, a lot of these audience members are going to be hearing us and hearing you speak about HR as a function would also want to understand a little bit more about career options today. There are different trends. Technology volatility is changing a lot of things. There's a lot of confusion out there in terms of how to build a meaningful career. Is there a right path to it? Of course, is there a path in the first place? And is there a right path, or there are multiple right paths? So if you could just share a little bit of perspective around how do you build a career in a much more complicated environment that we're seeing these days?
Yeah, absolutely. That's pertinent and clearly top of mind for everyone right now. Till some time ago, any good organization worth its salt would have extremely, beautiful presentations and frameworks to define how careers can get built and how much time you spend at each level and so on and so forth. No organization today can afford to do that because, like you said, there is just so much changing all the time. And every second week, we are seeing new research coming out. These are the top 30 jobs which won't exist 3 years later. These are the jobs that don't exist today, which will exist 3 years later. And there is only so much of, astrology that one can do to figure out what is going to exist and what is not going to exist.
True.
So I think for an individual to sort of cut out all of this noise and focus on building the career. I mean, these are 2 or 3 perspectives that I would have, right? A, you need to build agility as your core skill and mindset. Anyone who's expecting steadiness in terms of career, a predictability in terms of career, are they just fooling themselves, right? Any interviewer who's asking questions like, what do you want to do 5 years from now? Like in terms of specific things, or which position do you want to be? They are living in a different paradise or a different multiverse, is all I can say, right? True. There is absolutely no way one can predict where one can go. And in fact, that works both ways. It sounds scary, but it's actually the opposite because the opportunities are so much, right? You see people doing so many wonderful things today. You see, people of a certain age taking up roles and positions, which till 10, 15 years ago would only be done by people who had like 20 years more experience than they do. Right? And that is possible because the world is changing at such a rapid pace that it is your professional skills, like your agility, your ability to lead, your ability to collaborate, your ability to harness technology, that is playing the key role in your success. And not quote unquote the number of years experience you have, which is becoming, or the quote unquote the institute that you belong to, or the quote unquote batch that you belong to. These are becoming more and more outdated concepts. So you have to be fundamentally agile. Right? You have to be able to be a bit of a hustler, that you're able to spot and take up opportunities as they come up. You also, it's like steering a car. So you can only steer a car if you know which direction you're moving in. So you can't define milestones, but what you can do for yourself is directionally know what you want to do. And in all my coaching conversations, the toughest question that people find is when I ask the question saying, what do you want? What are you looking for? Right? And it is the toughest question. People are just not able to figure out that answer. I think getting that answer right is 50% of the problem solved. The second is, like I said, build the agile mindset. Think about yourself, depersonalize, dehumanize things, and think about yourself as a product and a brand. Right? Like any product, even you have a life cycle. So what is unique about you? How are you going to sell yourself to the world? And how do you break out of the clutter that all other products and all other brands around you are pitching for the same thing, right? How are you going to evolve a little way down the line? So I think this mindset of viewing yourself as a product and a brand can truly make your sort of career life cycle much longer. And like I said, there is no such thing as a corporate ladder anymore. So one gets used. I mean, look at the career you've had, right? You've done such diverse number of things with different kinds of companies and so on. And I see most people now, successful people now, being able to do that. The thing is, safe choices will make safe careers. But there are no safe careers anymore. So safe choices are only going to land you into trouble. You have to lean into a little bit of risk. You have to push yourself out of the comfort zone and accept the fact that there is not going to be a corporate ladder. There is going to be a very lattice type framework, and you have to be a hustler and get opportunities as you go along.
Very true. I mean, today, if you say that you have to be at a particular role for 3 years before you could be considered for a promotion, you're questioned why.
Yeah.
And the thing in the middle management that I've observed is that they just cannot explain why. And then they question the senior leadership. Why? Why 3 years at a particular role? And there are always frameworks in place which tries to answer or address these concerns by saying this is the amount of maturity in that capability that you need to build and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
But the question from the other side is always this: if we are able to create a certain amount of impact that is expected for the next level promotion, why is that not happening then?
Yeah. So can I respond to that? That's exactly what's been happening, right? So these models that were created by companies, they were excellent thought through models. And there was a reason why there was a 2 years somewhere, a 3 years somewhere, a 4 years somewhere. Or there was a rotational aspect saying a person has to do XYZ roles before being considered for this.
Right.
The reason for that was that you were making sure that people had the right kind of experiences, impact, and learning before they got to the next level. Now, the world changed. So what people hung on to were those structures saying 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, forgetting that, it's not about following it in letter, it's about following it in spirit.
Right. Exactly.
And to the exactly the same thing that you just mentioned, the manager's response doesn't have to be, you have to spend 2 years to do this before you get considered for the promotion. It has to be about, you have to demonstrate XYZ impact before we think about you taking up a bigger role.
Makes sense.
That's the right conversation to have with anyone of today's generation. And whether the journey to that XYZ impact takes 1 year or 2 years or 3 years depends on the individual. Right. But that's a shift that needs to get created now. I agree.
No, that's fantastic. All the young viewers who are listening to Sudeep right now, this is a fantastic piece of advice. Do follow this.
I hope I haven't boiled the ocean too much for them.
No,
anyway.
I'm sure this is going to be superbly valuable, right? Because there's a lot of confusion out there. Yeah. And this clarity would help them a lot. Sudeep, you're also a DEI champion. You've been championing this. You've been very passionate about this for a while. Interestingly, over the last couple of months, if I'm not wrong, there's been a lot of pushback on DEI, frameworks and activation aspects that we've been seeing across US, and that has had cascading impact across the globe. What are your views around the same in US or now? What's the impact that you're seeing in India as well? Do you agree with what's happening?
No, I don't think anyone who's passionate about DEI would agree. But I'm no expert to comment deeply on what's happening in the US. But I do still believe that any great organization has understood over a period of time that inclusion is the key to innovation and growth. In my early parts of my career, so as I grew up, like I said, I understood what being the other was, because I was always different from everyone else around me. I was always the nerd. I was always the one, reading instead of playing. I was in a boys' school, so you can imagine how much of borderline bullying that I went through. But I also saw a lot of acceptance in my family, amongst my teachers, for the person that I was. So I saw both sides of the coin on what being not included can do to you and what being included can do and the kind of potential it can unleash.
True.
And over the early parts of my career, I heard this in one of my earliest roles where a woman leader spoke to me and used the words, "I don't belong here." And, I have heard variations of that statement in so many different forms.
Right.
Sometimes it's related to gender, sometimes it's related to the ethnic background you come from, the language that you speak, the orientation that you have. And I have heard it in many different forms.
Right.
And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to connect the dots and realize if there are multiple people in an organization who believe that they quote unquote don't belong, you are not going to be able to harness the potential. I mean, it's as basic as that, right? I'm not
Right.
even going in the altruistic direction. I'm not even saying, oh, it's very sad. I'm not putting a moral judgment on it. I'm just saying, as an organization, you are missing out on a huge part of human potential within and outside your organization.
True.
I do believe companies get it. How they will activate it is, I think, what is changing right now.
Okay.
So I believe that, first of all, we need to not get over-indexed on what's happening in the US. And those these are large, influential companies and global companies. But remember, they are still just one part of the ecosystem.
Right.
In India, for example, companies like, say, Godrej have done a tremendous amount of work, or even Infosys for that matter, have done a tremendous amount of work on DEI and done fabulous work there. So, we shouldn't get over-indexed. And secondly, like I said, there is an opportunity now to reframe on how we are going to drive inclusion in the future. Maybe, so far we've been very programmatic about it. We have used representation as our primary sort of indicator or metric, and so on. And we've been sort of activist about it, right? Which is fine. But if we shift the lens a little bit to making it more business centric,
Right.
and saying what makes sense for the business, and the definition might change, therefore, and you don't have to copy paste programs anymore.
Right.
Right. I remember in an earlier conversation you and I were having, I'm actually going to put words in your mouth and speak on your behalf, but
Sure.
you spoke about, how people used to talk about quote unquote diversity candidates.
Oh yeah.
It's one of my pet peeves, right? It's one of women's professionals' pet peeves.
Yeah.
Who wants to be reduced to that verbiage of
Exactly.
being called a diversity candidate?
Yep.
But that was unfortunately a byproduct of representation numbers that many companies chased, targets that were given, and so on. So maybe this is an opportunity to hit refresh
Yeah.
and say that we're going to become less about programs and representation, but more about creating inclusion at the ground level and make sense of what works for the business. So make it a lot more business centric. I mean, that's what I would like to believe. And I do believe that because people are still passionate.
Yeah.
Forget about not just HR leaders or DEI leaders, but business leaders. I know any progressive business leader still realizes and understands that inclusion is key. So I'm hopeful.
Thank you. I would like to have a similar view around being hopeful from the ecosystem. But I've seen that when we talk about diversity, like you mentioned, women are still considered diversity candidates, one. But from an inclusion standpoint, I still don't see enough of actual execution push. They have written policies versus actual implementation of those policies for even women in the country, even in large organizations, Fortune 100 organizations, a lot of times.
Right.
There are pros and cons I've seen. For example, if you talk about a mat leave, India is one of those better of countries in terms of
Yes.
policies of 6 months of mat leave. But there's 15 days of pat leave. That means you're expected as a father to work and the mother
Yeah.
can take 6 months gap to take care of the baby. It's not equal parenting. And if a father demands for more, they look down upon you. I mean, why do you need to be at home to take care of a kid? Yeah, this is something that I've personally gone through.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of times when we talk about inclusion of women, IWD, International Women's Day, is a perfect example. I've found it's ridiculously funny. Year on year, as a corporate leader, I've been asked internally by the Corpcoms team, Abhay, IWD is a week away. So now we would want you to record a statement about who is the woman which inspires you the most and why. Because the next 10 days, we're going to be running a lot of campaigns to promote women in the organization and women at large. The rest of the 355 days, there's no conversation about this. So even inclusion from a women's perspective, so far, I see a lot of these Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies not really meaning it the way it should be, taken. I mean, they're not taking it as seriously as they should. Forget about other clusters of diversity and inclusion that we talk about that, for example, I would have no issues with. When I was hiring, I had no, like you mentioned, right? I completely align on that fact that, you talk about business impact. Whoever can, whatever kind of talent can bring that kind of a business impact for that particular role, bring them in. It doesn't matter which state, country, geography, ethnicity, language, gender, orientation that they belong to. You bring them in because they're going to bring you, they're going to be one of the core members of the team. They're going to create impact, business impact, outcomes. And that's why you want them there, for the talent that they bring in. But I don't see a lot of people do that. I'm just putting it out there.
Well, it's going to sound like a painful cliche, but it is true that, like everything else, inclusion is also a journey, and there are different companies and different individuals that are at different stages of it. Let me first respond to your point about IWD and stuff like that. While I also cringe sometimes at the tokenism around some of these events, I will not also shy away from saying that these dates and these events continue to be important for a certain reason. Yes, over a period of time, sometimes we have tend to reduce them to tokenistic gestures. But having said that, there is a reason why, and symbolism is important, right? So even if there be a day or a week in a month, in a year, when you pause and reflect on the journey that women have had in the workforce, or during Pride, think about the journey that people from the LGBTQ plus community have had, or in December, think about the people with disabilities who've had, and many other such dates in a year. It's an important time. So, for example, the conversation you just initiated about how much of progress do women truly see on the ground, and whether policies have actually moved in tandem or not, is a good conversation to have around IWD, because that's the right time to focus your energy there, instead of, like you said, doing tokenistic gestures.
Right.
But that's why I think these dates and these events continue to be important. Though I would like to say that we can make them a lot more meaningful and not tokenism. On the first point, like you said, there are different companies at different stages of the journey. A lot of companies do have extremely well-meaning policies and practices, but it takes time to execute, because you also have to remember that the people executing policies and practices on the ground are also people who come with their own baggage and their own biases and their own journeys and so on and so forth.
Right.
So, when I took a break last year, people said, "Oh, you're brave. That is so brave of you." Nobody calls a woman brave for taking a break. She has to take a break sometimes to look after a family, or get married and relocate somewhere else, and so on and so forth. Nobody calls a man taking a break. Oh my God!
Yeah.
How come you're so brave for taking a break?
Very
But
true.
it's a double-edged sword, because it also means that men in our ecosystem can't take a break, because that's the perception.
Yeah.
And what would society say, right?
Yep.
Which means that right from the beginning, you are creating this gender inequitable sort of ecosystem.
Very true.
So, like I said, it works both ways. And until we also see, I think, deeper changes in our ecosystem, we will not be able to see those deeper changes even within the companies, even if companies drive. Because remember, ultimately, the people implementing those policies and practices are people who are also coming with their own baggages and mindsets. And that baggage and mindset takes a lot of time to change.
Makes a lot of sense. In fact, it reminds me of one of the shows. I'm forgetting the name of the show right now. I think this was produced by Sumit Vyas. And it was on parenting. Very recent show that I saw. And very, very interesting take on it because one of the male protagonists, he is a stay-at-home father, and they were using abbreviations for that, and I was loving it because while this guy was dissed upon by a lot of people in his close ecosystem, saying that how can you be working? How can you not be working? How can you be staying at home and taking care of a kid when your wife goes out to work? I think it is a problem that I see a lot of men go through.
Yeah.
And that was so relatable. And since we're talking about content and movies and shows, is that, I mean, I know you said that, you've always loved content. Is that the reason why you joined Netflix?
A big reason. I won't deny that. Obviously, hugely inspiring organization and culture and all of that stuff. But I will say that, obviously my love for movies and content is a big, big reason of why I'm so passionate and why I'm there at Netflix, for sure.
Amazing. So you're driving organizational health and culture at Netflix. And I'm assuming that, while you're driving this from an Indian perspective too, it must need to align with the global thesis. And there would be a lot of Indian nuances to it as well. How are you dealing with this? Do you want to share a little bit of a perspective around how this happens at Netflix?
So I was actually very, very intrigued by the same thing for many years away. Netflix, the Netflix culture memo, which got released many years ago, really challenged and disrupted the way we think about talent and culture. And first, the Silicon Valley tech people took it up, and then it became sort of a larger tech thing. And then a lot of Indian startups. So I had, last year when I was consulting, I had companies that actually showed me the culture memo and said, "How do I get this in my company?" And I had to kind of tell them it is a journey, and you don't just switch on a switch and get Netflix culture. But Netflix, and sorry, I was saying that is what intrigued me as well, because when you read about a company that has such a tremendously unique approach to its culture and has such strong views on what it is and what it isn't, and what the values are and aren't, you're kind of keen to see what behind the scenes and how does it work. And exactly to your point, right? I mean, it's a global company. It's operating in so many different countries, each with their own sort of ecosystem and very different from one another. How do you implement it? But I think the answer lay in its culture itself. So one of the founding tenets of the culture is about being strongly aligned and loosely coupled, right? And the alignment comes in the way we think about culture. Think about the kind of people we want to hire. Think about the kind of values that we want them to demonstrate, right? And that remains consistent. But it is also about saying, hire the best people, make sure you give them loads and loads of context, make sure that we have got people with the right sort of values, and then get out of the way to let them do their best job. And I see that getting implemented here on a day-to-day basis. Our content team, for example, right? They are guided by a very, very clear, sharp strategy, which comes in, which gets defined globally. And interestingly, that's a separate conversation, but even the definition of the global strategy is being done in a way bottoms up, right? Where everyone gets to contribute to it.
That's amazing.
But having said that, while the strategy is the broader strategy is global, I see the content team in India taking calls on a day-to-day basis, leaning into risk, defining who the right relationships are that need to get invested in, what the right bets are that we need to take, figuring out where the right investments need to go, and then seeing it all play out. And, it mostly plays out, and sometimes if it doesn't, you learn and move on. But it's a fabulously talented team that is, working beautifully with each other and across functions, getting guided by global strategy, but not getting constrained by it. The strategy becomes more of an enabler than a boundary or a constraint. And I see that getting implemented on a day-to-day basis. And culture is a living, breathing thing, right? There is no static culture. So as Netflix grows and evolves, so does the culture. And if you look at Japan, you look at India, you look at US, extremely different markets, but guided by a common set of values, guided by a common broad strategy, but each one doing what's right for their business. And that's why being tremendously successful in their own ecosystem. So I see the balance that you spoke about working beautifully, but I also realize that it will constantly evolve as we continue to grow.
That's fantastic. I think people who are listening to us would be very excited about applying to Netflix now. I'm sure they already are, but they're going to be even more encouraged after listening to you. Can they go ahead and reach out to you then in that case?
To the career site,
portal.
yes.
All right. So people who are listening to us who want to apply to Netflix, please just go to the career portal, career site, and
always on the lookout for fabulous people. Yeah, always.
You hear it from the man himself, right? So thank you so much, Sudeep, on that. Technology is also one of those factors, Sudeep, that I've noticed over the years, which has been so volatile and changing things so rapidly for all the functions, all the companies across the globe, right? That's also impacted culture in a negative way in some large organizations, specifically the Silicon Valley organizations that you were referring to earlier as well, right? Where the last 2-3 years, at least what I've heard is that the culture of hiring and firing has been very dominant, specifically last 2-3 years. But I also believe that technology can be a very strong enabler. Do you see technology enabling HR as a function? Any mundane task that gets automated because of technology and so on?
Yeah. I mean, automation is at the basic level, right? And that's already started. It started with recruiting. A lot of recruiting basic processes got automated, and then it went on to internal employee services, operations, especially for large scale organizations, right? Where that got automated and new platforms got deployed. So we already see that happening, and that's sort of continuing to grow. But I do believe that even from a people or from a talent perspective, there's a lot more that can be done with technology and for technology. So for example, the point that you mentioned about a lot of, at least perceptively speaking, a lot of the hiring and firing that has taken place, etc. If one can be a little bit more thoughtful about how you can build the right technological skills in your workforce over a period of time, using the build model rather than the buy model is a lot more beneficial to your company.
Right.
But buy model is easier. So you end up firing lots of people and then hiring lots of people because it's an easier thing to do. But the more thoughtful and sustainable thing to do is to build.
Right.
And that's a huge area of opportunity because you're also enhancing the skill base of your entire workforce and India. So that's a fabulous thing, right? But even beyond, like I said, recruiting is already using, operations and services are already using. But even learning, for example, right? I don't know, you could validate this independently, but I believe that Accenture, for example, already has some version of a metaverse that it uses to onboard and train its employees, which is so important considering you're talking about literally hundreds of thousands of people.
Right.
That's an amazing opportunity to think about learning and immersive learning, particularly now when I think people are really tired of traditional learning and development curriculums.
Very true.
And how do you make it a little bit more relevant? Or even workplace. Workplace, we've realized over the years, has a very important role in shaping the culture, and shaping the culture in terms of reinforcing the culture, and two, also directing it to what it should be. Right. And technology can really enable a workplace and really allow you to shape the culture the way you want it to get kind of shaped. Right. A colleague of mine recently did an offsite with their team, non-HR, right? And it was so fascinating. They used generative AI to plan their entire offsite, to do invites, to create stickers, to create an agenda, to create icebreakers, to create case studies. They were able to use a lot of that so intelligently. Right. And that to me is just one of so many ways that technology can enable the people and the talent function. So I think it's nothing people I know are apprehensive and afraid in many cases, but I actually feel it can be a huge game changer if we just allow it to be.
I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely going to be a lot of changes. I've been driving innovation for a decade now in large organizations, and I've noticed that there's always going to be that apprehension around change, but the change is inevitable, so it's going to happen. It's about, at least what I've looked at is that, how quickly can you align to that change and understand that, this can be used for your betterment.
Yeah. Can you ride the wave, or are you going to get crushed by it?
Exactly.
It's the choice that all of us have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Amazing. Work from home or hybrid? What do you prefer and why?
Hybrid, of course. I mean, it's an easier answer, but it's genuinely you have to harness the power of working with people. You have to harness the power of working by yourself, and a hybrid model just makes perfect sense always.
70 hours work week or 45 hours work week or 40 hours work week?
No, I don't think in terms of hours. As long as my to-do list is getting ticked off, that's enough for me. So I don't think in terms of hours.
Okay, cool. I would have appreciated a lot more for the audience if you would talk about what do you think about organizations' implementation of 70 hours work week?
Well, like I said, to each their own.
Okay.
Every organization finds its own talent pool. Every movie finds its own audience.
Right.
So, yeah, the two shall find each other.
Makes a lot of sense. Fair. If your life were a Netflix series, what would it be called and what genre would it fall under?
Well, I'm a shopaholic, so I could easily make a Confessions of a Shopaholic. You could also make it a sort of a political, corporate political intrigue story by calling it Confessions of an HR Professional.
Okay.
So that could be fun, kind of narrating behind the scenes look at some of these topics that we speak about.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. If we could swap jobs with any fictional character for a day, who would it be and why?
I don't know. Calvin and Hobbes. So I think Calvin, I would love to be Calvin, just a 6-year-old child chilling out and creating menace for everyone. You know, I was very fascinated by this book called The Fountainhead years ago. So I would love to be in the shoes of Howard Roark one day. So that sounds very fascinating. And I think
Nice.
if you look at all these serial killer, murder mystery sort of series nowadays, I think just being a little bit in the minds of people who either do it or detect it would also be very fascinating. You know, True Detective or one of these. There was this series called Murder Mindfully on Netflix, which has I think it's a French series of a man who goes to a mindfulness class,
Right.
and how that translates to the murder spree he goes on. I'm not saying I would like to do that, but I think just a day in the mind of a person like that would be very fascinating.
Wow, that's a very interesting take. What's the most bizarre piece of career advice that you ever received? Did you take it? Did it work out for you?
No, bizarre career advice I don't take. I get a lot of it, especially the kind that is sort of a lot of noise and politics.
Yeah.
So people say, you know, go and say this about so and so person, or go and throw that person under the bus, and all sorts of advice. You know, so I normally stay away from that. A good advice that I received last year was when I went through a really crazy roller coaster. I was physically, emotionally, mentally exhausted. And my sister told me to take a break. And I took it. And a lot of people don't realize that when you're on the hamster wheel, it is possible to step off the wheel for a little bit. And I did it. And it was a life-changing moment for me. So I'm very glad I took that advice.
That's amazing. No, that's actually truly amazing, right? Taking that breather can be so helpful. I have done that twice now. I think it's really, really beneficial.
Yes. We are the champions for taking breaks. Yeah.
One last question. If you had to mentor your younger self starting in HR, what unconventional advice would you give him?
Always have a sense of humor and always keep a glass of wine handy.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much. This side is what I was talking about. I wanted to get a perspective on this side of Sudeep Ralhan as well. Thank you so much, Sudeep, for letting us go a little deeper, understand this personality of yours, as well as get a lot of understanding about HR function at large and how you've been able to create impact in the lives of thousands of, if not millions, at least thousands and lakhs of people.
Definitely not.
So thank you so much for that. Loved hosting you. And I'm sure the audience is going to love this conversation. And they are going to reach out to Netflix career portal.
I'll have to make sure that the website is up to withstanding so much of pressure and so on. But thank you so much. Really enjoyed being here, having this conversation. You have asked me a lot of thought-provoking questions. I'm going to be thinking about this for a while now. So thanks for doing that as well. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Sudeep. And on that note, I did want to give you a hamper. It's not a coffee with Karan hamper, but it's a hamper nonetheless. And this is our token of gratitude for being a part of this.
Thank you. Thank you. This is very sweet. Thank you so much.
By the way,
Cute.
this is highly personalized.
Okay. Thank you.
And it's sponsored by Cupic Design, which creates unique, personalized, and premium corporate gifts that make a lasting impression. So I hope you remember us for the conversation as well as the gift.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think your expressions will probably do justice to that.
Yeah, don't capture my expressions. I hope you're not going to capture these weird expressions, but yeah.
Feel free to share your perspectives through comments, subscribe to the channel, and do send us some suggestions as well. Thank you.